If you don't know me, I'm Elisandro Pacheco. I'm the founder with Wesley Correas of Network Education. It's a school focused on schools for ISP, and since 2004 we have Next Hope, that is a company that is specialized in consulting for small providers. Here we have Wagner as one of the consultants that is in the forefront of our projects. Good afternoon to everyone. I am Wagner Zanoni. I've been in the network field for over than 8 years. I have a diploma in information technology from Sezucri. It's a university in Santa Catarina, and I am lead consultant at Next Hope Solutions. We chose a subject about safety in devices, especially OS, and a number of things drove us to choose this subject because there were a number of situations that concerned us. During the past year, we saw a number of announcements of new glitches or failures, not of one vendor, but as we have a number of routers, especially NIX, we thought that it would be convenient to talk about this subject during this seminar. Here we had exploit announcement, and this increases the risk that we have when we have routers that are vulnerable and that are susceptible to these failures. We carried out a study during the last publications of the last exploit that was public. During the date it was launched, we studied it, and we saw that things are dangerous and complex in IX because of the negligence from the network managers and people that maintain these routers connected to IX. Right, so we have, during the last year, we had a number of vulnerabilities from the router OS. This vulnerability is not insignificant when we compare it to other vendors. Now, a number of them were very severe, especially the one that allowed to attain the database of users together with the passwords of the different devices. Shodan, a very quick research per microtick in Brazil, we've seen the size of the problem. And what draws our attention here are 269,000 devices, 143,000 with a port of their PPT just open, wide open. This is concerning, especially because we do not recommend the use of this type of VPN, not even for the management, due to obvious reasons regarding safety failures and how it's easy to break passwords used in these type of connections. With a reasonable machine, in less than 2 days, you're able to encrypt one of these passwords. It can be sniffed, and there are even services in paid internet services that in a number of minutes can recover these passwords. Even Apple in the new systems release, they don't even have client, because this is concerning, because I saw a number of consultants that were desperate because wanted a client of PPT because the router OS had been removed. Instead of placing a safer VPN, they just prefer to go back and continue with things that are not safe. I don't know what they're doing. They're doing hookups in the operational system. Now, when we research through router OS, we can see over 60,000 devices with this port open, and it's not different in IX because when the rules are stricter, it is normal, of course, to see people complaining constantly that NIC or the registry is being too strict when it comes to rules. But generally, who complains is the person that enables the SLMP after quarantine, and then they go through quarantine and then they disable it. Now, what about the amount of devices that have vulnerable releases? Although after all of the impact that we had of all the problems that were faced, we still have a lot of equipment that is vulnerable in the market and totally, not updated. The vendor explained the updates and they explained what releases were affected, and we still have devices that are not updated. Here we can still say, oh, but this attacks all the CP. It's very difficult to control all of this because generally people don't do filters of the lower ports. Although we can use this as a safety measure of the network, of course, due to the rules that we have to abide by, if user requests not to block these ports, you have to release the port. In the date that this exploit was published, in the IX São Paulo, there were 368 router OSs with their management totally exposed. So they were exposed to inbox and all their ports were exposed, only in São Paulo. Now, out of all these devices, 64 were vulnerable, totally outdated and vulnerable. Now, this is highly concerning, but what as a matter of fact concerned me, and in GTA 39 in 2015, I said something that offended many people, and I said, those that learned BGP and MicroTik learned MicroTik and not GDP. I have to correct it because 8 haven't even learned MicroTik. At the end of the line, they left a piece of equipment that does GP connected to an IX SP. So 8 pieces of equipment doing BGP and IX São Paulo. Now, speaking as an autonomous system or responsible for some, this concerns me not because each one takes care of their own network the way they wish. Nevertheless, this autonomy, and the name is clear, it's an autonomous system, gives us responsibilities, and if we do something foolish, we're not going to affect only our customers and our network. We can bring very serious problems to the internet as a whole. There were very recent cases with someone that announced the prefixes of secret in the IX, and you can't even contact this person. So these type of things here concern me, worry me, precisely because of the impact that this could have. Can you imagine a person with bad intention that has access to 64 routers, and in this case, we're specifically talking about routers that are dealing with BGP and exchanging traffic in IX São Paulo. And there was a wise guy that chased to 8292 because they were vulnerable. Now in Rio de Janeiro, there were 59 devices with exposed management. 9 of them were vulnerable, and none of them had a default password in this date. We're talking about July. And then we're going to talk about how to improve the situation, protecting the management of all of these devices using a port knocking technique. Obviously, we're not saying that this is the best solution and that it resolves all the problems, and this should be seen as an absolute truth. The alternative right now is precisely for all of those that have no control over their devices management. Generally, we use an isolated layer that is only accessible through a VPN. But very recently, there were some presentations regarding the subject, but we decided to add one of the important points, and Wagner is going to talk a bit of what we're doing and how we're doing this. First and foremost, I will talk about how the port knocking works. This is a firewall technique in a customer. It's the customer trying to communicate with the destination. They send a sequence of packets through different ports to the destination, and these ports are filtered and protected in their firewall. Nevertheless, now the destination is listening to these ports. And if these ports are sent in the right sequence, what do I mean? In the sequence that was determined in the port knocking policies and the firewall of the destination, well, this customer has privileged access to the box or to the network depending on the setting of this destination.
Passando agora, a gente vai trazer alguns exemplos, né, em cima do router OS de como.
So how to apply this technology and this technique of firewall and port knocking. First example, we have our customer, and he's trying to connect to his destination. The first door of port knock is port 1000. Now, port 1000, when the customer tries to connect with it, the customer will be added in the list of this port. So the customer knocked port 1000, he's listed to a port with a timeout of 1 minute. Now, if within this 1 minute period they communicate with the router, with this destination, in this example here we have port 3000, okay? They will be added to a second address list, the address list secure, that will be also used in the release of input of this router. Here we have a very practical example of how to apply this in router OS. Here we can visualize the two first where they added to the address list, and here we have the exception. When the customer was able to go through the port knock, he's in the secure list, and then as of this moment, the customer has access to the router input. So here we have a drop rule, because we know that the standard policy of micro-tick and router OS is accept there's no use in doing a control if at the end of the line you don't drop the rest. Now, simply analyzing this solution, okay? Although it does protect the management ports of the device, we have a number of things that should be assessed. Number one, the low level of safety. 3 very important factors have to be taken into account. Only 2 ports to knock on. An ever-growing sequence of ports and a timeout of 1 minute amongst the list. One detail here, it wouldn't make sense to bring something that we're saying isn't the best way of doing things. Nevertheless, we use this first example in this presentation precisely because this is an example that is in the official wiki of Router OS. If you go to the official wiki, this is the example that you will find. I don't know if people are based on the documentation, and sometimes it's not as effective and as safe as it seems. As Alessandro just mentioned, this timeout, this high timeout that is 1 minute, 2 ports to knock on, an ever-growing sequence is very easy to circumvent with a sports scanner that is a bit more aggressive. In a matter of seconds, we could access the secure list with our origin IP and then manage the device totally open to us. And we changed 2 port scanners in parallel in seconds, the way that is in the wiki of the router OS. And we opened the entire management of the device for us. This is more recommendable and safer if we're going to do this type of firewall technique. So what we do, we use the first port 54389 and with a timeout of 10 seconds. The technique is very similar to that of the first example. The customer is going to knock on this door, and when they're able, they will be added to the correspondent address list. And as of this moment, he will have a second door to knock on. In this list is port 1763. Commonly, they're going to knock on 1763. They will be added to the list of 1763 once again for 10 seconds. And then comes a difference, a major difference from the first example. There is a third door or port to knock on. This third door, and it's a third address list, that is the secure address list. As of the moment, they go into the three doors in a sequence, and we've changed the timeout in 10 seconds. They will go into a secure list, and as soon as the firewall policies will allow them to go in, and they will be able to manage the device. What we have once again here is the example of the different rules, very simple to be applied. It's important to notice that we use a higher and lower port, and then we use a higher port again. Perhaps it doesn't make a great difference for you, but when you have a scanner that comes in sequence, it's not going to be able to match the port sequence at the first trial because you have one high, low, then high. The scanner should be much more aggressive in order to open the port. And one of the points that we would like to show you in the analysis of the second example, we scored the three matters that were in the official wiki page. Something that we consider of low level of safety is the use of two ports. We added a third port here. When we added the third port, we exponentially increased the likelihood of possibilities of breaking this type of safety in terms of packets, the non-sequential ports, as Alessandro just mentioned, and the timeout between these attempts, we reduced to 10 seconds, which changes a lot in terms of a port scanner because it's going to scan, it's going to have the first difficulty of having ports that are not in sequence and an additional difficulty that will be 10 seconds amongst the different attempts to go in. So it's very difficult to circumvent these rules. But we still have a third example that even more restrictive. And depending on the scenario, you will choose what you will do. I am not going to go into details because the ports are the same ports of number 2. So you can realize here on the screen the three same ports. What changes is the final part. The final part, instead of using the security list to release the input to the box, we release a number of specific protocol ports that is necessary in order to close a VPN in 2TP with IPsec. That is the technology that we used in this example. It could be something else, but this is what we used here. Here we have the examples of the settings, so we can validate in the last lines the difference in the settings. Before we would release the entire input, now we release some DP ports, 500, 1701, 4500, and in protocol IPsec SP with the origin of the secure list that is necessary in order to establish this VPN. And in the third rule, we use a new list that is management network, and as of this list we can release the entire input. This list is where you will find the IPs that the customer that is able to connect to the VPN will be able to access. So basically no VPN servers are left open. And in this case, the management is done through one VPN, but this VPN is not exposed. We need to knock on the different doors, on the sequence of doors, to open the VPN ports, and then we're able to connect to the VPN. Yes, the gist of the matter is to authenticate in 2 stages. During the first stage, you have the port knocking. That is the first part of safety. You will have to discover this, and there you will have the possibility to go to the second stage. And here, the second stage, you have to establish a VPN. Here we have an example of the setting of the pools and how we use the L2TP server. This was very simple to apply to IPsec. And the setting of the profile, the PP profile that we used in the VPN. We already gave you the analysis. So it's just like the second example. Nevertheless, with the difference here, you have only the possibility to establish this VPN, this authentication of 2 stages allows you to do this. Another alternative, another mistake that we see, and that is very common to see by providers, even those that place their management through VPN, they generally configure their server, their VPN server, like we saw in the scan, in their own equipment, their backbone equipment, for example, the ones that do BGP. Now, this means that if by any chance your VPN server is compromised, it will compromise a critical box of your network. As an alternative, we have used OpenSense of a fork of PaintSense, and we have strongly contributed here, and we use it for the authentication, centralized of the network devices as well as to be a VPN server. Some people do not like the software open source, others respect it, but we have strongly contributed here, especially when it comes to routing. That is using FFR, and there are a lot of people using it. And we contribute strongly with this project, especially in the development of routers. And there is a rule that part of our free time is dedicated to contribute to projects that we use on our day-by-day. So this is an additional example. This one, for example, allows, and we have protocols of our own redundancy, and if you want to use it as an alternative for a firewall router OS, of course, it has many more functionalities. It does many things that we can't do with router OS because it's not the purpose of router OS to do this. If you're interested in this project, I do recommend it to you. Here you have the site. And for the time being, we thank you for the opportunity once again, although we're talking about a matter that we really consider basic and even too basic to present in an event so technical like this event, but we considered important to highlight because of the figures that we attained from inside the IXs. So I hope that this helps you. So Rubens Q, as I said, is a person that I deeply admire, and he always helps me, and he always gives me guidance in this path. So for the time being, this is it. And do you have questions, comments? We do have this. Do any of you have any questions here to Lisandro, to Wagner?
Que não, né? Então tá tranquilo, todo mundo com a gerência.
Com certeza.
Resguardado. Então tá.
Obrigado,
obrigado pessoal, e até uma próxima
Thank you
oportunidade.
very much. Until the next opportunity.